During the First World War, which started in 1914 and ended in 1918, Germany was run by the Kaiser. The Kaiser was in charge of the government and the army. The government decisions were made by the Chancellor, but the Kaiser chose who the Chancellor was, so he could always pick chancellors that would do what he wanted. People could vote, but MPs didn't really have any power. The Kaiser was obsessed with the military. He spent millions on building up a strong army for the war and borrowed millions trying to win it. The German people liked this form of government. They loved their military tradition and felt that being told what to do was a sign that the government was strong. The Kaiser ran away into exile 2 days before the end of the war. Effects of World War I on Germany. Political effects. With the Kaiser running away, all that was left of the government were the Reichstag parties that had no previous real power or experience of running the government. The Kaiser had even put many of the best opposition leaders in prison during the war, meaning that there were even fewer men able to take power. Physical and financial effects. Farming had been disrupted during the war, so by 1918 Germany was producing only half the milk and 60% of the meat it needed. The British Navy was blockading ports, meaning that they could not get food from other countries. Around 75,000 Germans died from hunger and disease. Also, Germany had borrowed money to pay for the war and was now effectively bankrupt. Psychological effects. Germany had been a proud, ambitious country that had worked extremely hard and made many sacrifices to win the war. Throughout the war, they were assured by their leaders that Germany would win. Losing was devastating to the pride of most Germans. Automatically they looked for someone to blame. They felt weak politicians in the new Weimar Republic had cost them the war. The stab in the back. It was actually the army that signed the armistice, but people started saying it was the new government, the Weimar Republic, that was to blame. People couldn't understand why they had lost the war even though they had not been invaded. They assumed politicians had stabbed the army in the back by surrendering, when they could have won. The army was delighted to pretend this was true. Now let's look at the structure of the Weimar Constitution. Proportional representation. A very fair and modern voting system where a party gets a number of seats directly proportional to the percent of the votes it got. If your party got 12% of all votes, then they would get 12% of all seats. This led to lots of little parties getting seats, because no party ever got 50% of the votes. No government ever had a majority, so decisions needed other parties to agree, and often they didn't. Governments had to be coalitions, made up of members of several parties who often disagreed. Article 48. This was the 48th article of the Constitution. It allowed the President to rule by decree in an emergency. This meant that he could make decisions and laws without having to ask the Reichstag to vote on it. This was designed to protect Germany in an emergency. But it meant that the President could rule as a dictator in an emergency, and it was never up to the President to decide what an emergency was. This clause was open to abuse and needed the President to be honest and want to protect the Republic. Major strengths and achievements of the Constitution. All Germans had the right to vote at the age of 20. Few countries in the world allowed everyone to vote. The proportional representation voting system was in theory fairer. Each party got the number of seats in proportion to the percent of the vote they got. The President had similar powers to the President of the United States. His power was very strong, so he could protect the Republic in a crisis. Free speech, freedom of newspapers, and freedom to set up trade unions, and anyone could form a political party. All of these were completely new freedoms for Germany, and are very modern for the time. Major weaknesses of the Constitution. Proportional representation meant that whatever government or party was in power, it was always weak. Governments always had to compromise, and decisions could take a long time. There were lots of elections because parties refused to agree. Article 48 would later be used and abused by Hitler to make himself a dictator legally. In 1919, the Republic already had lots of enemies. This constitution was too fair. It gave these people the vote and the right to create their own parties, like the Nazis. Being asked to vote was seen as a sign of weakness by many Germans, who were used to following orders. Treaty of Versailles. What was it? Basically, it was a peace agreement that was forced on Germany in 1919 because they had lost World War I. Countries that lose wars usually have to sign agreements with the winners. They agree to give over certain things in exchange for not being invaded or destroyed. Why did Germany expect a fair treaty? Germany was in real trouble. World War I had bankrupted the country and some were starving. The Weimar government assumed that the treaty would be light so as not to cost any more German lives. The Kaiser was gone, and a new, democratic government was in place, just like the Allies had. Germany assumed the winning powers would like this and would want to help it remain stable. Woodrow Wilson, President of the USA, wanted a fair treaty. He declared 14 points that would make a better world and believed the treaty should allow Germany to recover. What did the winning powers want? France. George Clemenceau wanted to crush Germany and forever prevent her from being a major world power. He wanted Germany to pay massive reparations and have no army. Britain. David Lloyd George wanted to punish Germany harshly and get money from them, but he wanted Germany to be able to recover. USA. Woodrow Wilson believed that the war was everyone's fault. He feared that Germany would one day want revenge if the treaty was too harsh. The terms of the Treaty of Versailles. To remember this, we're going to use an acronym, LAM. Firstly, we'll start with L, which stands for land. 13% of Germany's land and 6 million German people were lost. 10% of industry and 15% of agriculture were taken. Alsace and Lorraine were given to France. The Saar coalfields, which was most of Germany's coal production, were given to France for 15 years. West Prussia, also known as the Polish Corridor, was given to Poland. This later starts World War II. The effect this had on Germany. Anger and hardship. Felt like German land and people were being stolen. Some Germans now living in other countries like France and Poland. Created huge money problems. A big portion of the industry and agriculture was taken from an already bankrupt country. A. This stands for Army. The army was to be reduced to 100,000 men, with no air force, a navy limited to 6 battleships with no submarines, no poisonous gas, no tanks. Also, the area near Germany, called the Rhineland, was to have French troops in it for 15 years. The effect this had on Germany. Humiliation. Germany was no longer a strong country to be feared, but a weak one at the mercy of the Allies. Germany had a strong military tradition, so losing their military was very humiliating and caused Germans to lose a lot of pride. Millions of soldiers were also out of work now and ended up joining the Freikorps. M. This stands for money. Germany had to pay Britain, France and the USA £6.6 billion in reparation in annual instalments. Effect on Germany. Economic crisis. Germany was already nearly bankrupt from the war. The Weimar government believed they had almost no chance of being able to meet the payments. Loss of land made it even harder. Reparations meant Germany was unlikely to recover and become an important country again. B. This stands for blame. Germany must accept complete blame for starting World War I. Anger. Germans rightly believed that they were not the ones to blame for the war. They felt the Treaty of Versailles had been forced on them by evil allies and weak politicians. Problems the Treaty of Versailles caused. The Treaty of Versailles created many problems for Germany, especially that it made it weaker and bankrupt. The Weimar Republic was blamed for the treaty because they signed it, making the new government even more hated. In fact, Frederick Ebert, the president, didn't want to sign it. The army told him to because they said they would not be able to stop an Allied invasion of Germany. Remember, questions on the Treaty of Versailles may ask you about German reactions, why Germans hated it so much, and why they were so angry. Source questions especially tend to look at the Treaty of Versailles from this angle, often showing the German opinions of the Allies and their own politicians who signed it. Some higher mark questions may ask you, what were the problems of the Weimar Republic, or was it doomed from the start? In these, you should mention the major problems that the Treaty of Versailles created for the new republic. Remember, 1919 is one of the key years in this course for these reasons. 1919. Other problems the Weimar Republic faced. Political extremists. Because the Weimar Republic was so unpopular from the start, lots of groups tried to overthrow it early in its life. These were political extremists, groups who had extreme views and wanted Germany to become a dictatorship again. The Communists. The Communists were on the extreme left. They believed that everyone should have equal pay and that nobody should individually own anything. Everything should be shared. They believed that all factories should be owned by workers who shared the profits equally. The Spartakists is an example of an extreme left communist group. Fascists, the extreme right, believe in survival of the fittest. The best people, often the rich, deserve what they have because they are naturally better. Weak people should not be helped because the country needs only strong people. An example of a far-right fascist party would be the Nazis. And about middle far-right would be the Cat Putsch. The Spartakists, led by Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. Their aims? To overthrow the Weimar Republic and create a communist government in Germany. What they did? Tried to start a revolution in Berlin. They took control of the government's newspaper headquarters and the telegraph bureau, but they failed to capture anything else. They won some support from the working classes. What happened? The Weimar government used the Freikorps, the right-wing ex-soldiers, to defeat the Spartakists. They murdered Liebknecht and Luxemburg and crushed the uprising. The Freikorps also put down several other uprisings during 1919. March 1920. The Kapp Putsch. Led by Wolfgang Kapp, who was one of the Freikorps commanders. Aims to overthrow the Weimar Republic and create a right-wing dictatorship to ignore the Treaty of Versailles. What they did. They marched into Berlin and took it over. President Ebert and the Weimar government were forced to run away. Kapp declared a new right-wing government. What happened? President Ebert appealed to the ordinary workers for help, and they went on strike, refusing to work for Kapp and the Freikorps. The strike was so successful that Kapp had to pull out within 4 days. However, none of the leaders of the putsch were punished, as the judges were sympathetic to right-wingers. Remember, questions do not often ask about political extremists directly, although you may get questions about the Munich Putsch. You should think about mentioning political extremists when talking about the problems the Weimar Republic faced. You might also talk about uprisings if you're asked what opposition there was to the government. Also, you must remember that the Republic successfully defended itself against all these uprisings. You might mention this in a question that asks you what the Weimar government's achievements were. That's all for this video. I'll go into 1923 in more depth in the next video, as it requires a video of its own.